I'm Brian McLachlan, creator of Complete the Quest, The Poisonous Library, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's July 19th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Brian McLachlan about Complete the Quest, The Poisonous Library. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Brian is part writer, part artist, but all cartoonist. He's the author of the ILA award-winning book, Draw Out the Story, 10 Secrets to Creating Your Own Comics, the picture book, What Noise Do I Make?, and the graphic novel, Ticket to Space. For over a decade, he's written Al Magazine's Alex and Charlie comic. Brian frequently does appearances and visits with schools, libraries, comic conventions, art festivals, book festivals, and more. His most current project is Complete the Quest, The Poisonous Library, a new kind of role-playing adventure for all ages, which reads like a graphic novel, but also plays like a game. With story panels and colorful visuals, this book provides an easy reference to help readers learn the mechanics of role-playing games, while giving them room to let their imagination soar as they save the kingdom in this interactive role-playing adventure. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Brian McLachlan about Complete the Quest, The Poisonous Library. So, Brian McLachlan, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Well, I'd say, I got eased in. My first comics were certainly newspaper strips and collections of those in, people's bathrooms, like going over to people's houses. Their parents would have copies of Herman or Far Side or Garfield or something. But if you're talking like what people would consider like a floppy issue of a comic, it was probably came in one of those 3-packs from Kmart, and it had Spider-Man Marvel team up with Luke Cage. The one that really stuck with me. They were inside of a burning building, and it was collapsing. And I think that was really captured my imagination. And I think the first one I bought then afterwards was an X-Men comic where they fought Dracula.
Oh, wow. That's something.
So I had some good luck in like the things that were given to me to lure me in. So I had like really funny stuff with, Garfield or whatever, and, easy to draw. So like at an early age, cartooning pretty quickly. And then, getting into the superhero stuff like Power Man and Spider-Man are still two of my favorite characters, and the X-Men and Dracula. I mean, that's a hard combination to beat.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, those are definitely good inspirations when you're growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
I'm actually really inspired by the role-playing game space right now, because I think about how you've probably heard people talk about violence in television and movies, and by the time our kids are this age, they've seen so many acts of violence, or they've seen this many advertisements. And I think I've seen so many stories, whether it's a movie or a TV show or a book or a comic, that I'm starting to be less surprised by them and enjoying them a little less. And I'm enjoying listening to people play Dungeons and Dragons because it's close enough to like a regular story, because all the people playing it know the archetypes that they want to be and that they want to engage with. But on the, on a die roll, the story can completely change. That the villain can be dead halfway through. That they can turn the villain into a hero, like, just with a mind control thing, and then trick them, and then suddenly the villain realizes, like, yeah, actually the whole reason for me being here is stupid, and then they've got a new villain that they've got to go after or something. Like, I like the randomness, and that's really sort of what's inspiring me, is to look at form and structure within traditional Western storytelling, but turning it on its ear, like looking for where it can go randomly wrong.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So we're here actually talking about your latest work, Complete the Quest, The Poisonous Library. You were talking about RPGs before, and I think this is definitely up that alley. So maybe you could talk a wee bit about it and maybe what inspired you to create this story.
Sure. It's a graphic novel that is also an RPG. Basically, it has multi-paths to it. You pick 3 of 6 different characters, and then you go through the adventure. And it's a little bit like a choose your own adventure where you're going to pick some paths, but the fact that it's a visual medium, that it's in comic books, is, I think it's literally a game changer. Like, I don't know about you, but when I had those choose your own adventure books, I sort of had FOMO. I'd have my fingers in between all those pages where I was like, oh no, what if I go left? What if I go right? What do I do?
Yeah.
And with this, because it's laid out visually, you can know which way you want to go. You can look and go, oh, the more interesting story would be for me to take my dwarf characters and go into the mines. Or you can say, oh, I don't have the dwarves. I have, the forest person, like plant person. So I want to go the mushroom way because maybe there'll be an interesting way for them to interact with these mushrooms here. And it gives you the information you don't have, because choose your own adventure usually said, do you want to go left or right? It didn't give you a lot of context, like what do you smell? What do you see? And I think the book gives you that, where you can sort of see which way you want to go and which is going to have the most interesting path. And it's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons module done visually. Like, here's an adventure, take some characters through it and figure out how they would get past these situations. Now, if you're using the 6 characters to start with that are in the book, like any of the 3 of the 6, there are ways to get through all of the different paths. Like, if you have this character, you can sneak your way past the guard. If you have this way, you can beat up the guard, and the way you tell the story changes each time you read it, or for each person who reads it. And it also encourages people to, come up with your own way. If you have a better way, like if you have a more interesting thing than I've thought of, go for it and do that. So it's a way to, hopefully people are inspired by it. The kids reading it start taking storytelling into their own hands a lot more. But the general crux of the story is that there's this queen named Queen Evergreen who has been poisoned by this mysterious book that arrived at her castle. And she's trying to fight it off, but she collapses, and her assistant, her right hand, Marisha, she decides she needs to put out a call for heroes to try and get the remedy for this poison. And so you've got to go and collect these ingredients that are going to save the day and help her, and then go take care of the person that sent the book. It's an epic story of, going on a quest, getting some stuff, saving a queendom, and not just one, because you start to learn that there are other people that have received other poisonous books, that there are bigger stakes.
Wow, that's quite unique. I've never heard of that type of graphic type of story. Of course, we've seen lots of role-playing textbooks, but not a graphic novel per se. So that's quite unique. Cool.
Yeah, I didn't think anybody had done anything like this. I just had the idea from reading, because you asked what inspired it. I was reading some Dungeons and Dragons modules, and I was thinking, I don't know if I will ever run this. Probably won't have the time to run. If you get one of those Dungeons and Dragons hardback books, they can take, a year or 2 years to finish. And, you get a few of those, and, only one of them you can do a year maybe, unless you're a hardcore gamer that's playing, lots of sessions. And so I thought, I'm having fun just reading this. The experience of reading this and imagining how I would go through it, or how certain people could go through it, and how it would affect the outcome, was really exciting and interesting to me. And I thought, what if I did that visually? Because I obviously think in comics. And when I twigged into that idea, everything just started to fall into place. And it's this novel new way of making, I don't think I've ever seen anything that's like this. And I hope people like it.
Sure. Well, typically the first thing I think of when Dungeons and Dragons is you've got to get a group of people together, right? Sometimes, here we are in a pandemic, and hopefully you got your family around you, but sometimes you just want to do the quest on your own, so to speak, right? So I think that's what this new graphic novel can help facilitate.
Yeah, and it's also great for it, how many times have players not had their group get together because somebody has to bow out, oh, this week I had to pick up an extra shift, or, I'm under the weather. Or kids who are just starting off and don't really have a gateway into it. Mm-hmm. As much as I enjoy role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, I can't give a Dungeons and Dragons book to my 8-year-old. Like it's just too dense. It's all words. There are some great pictures that spark the imagination, but this is more of a way to get people into it early and easily.
Sure. Sounds terrific, that's for sure. So it sounds like you had a lot of experience with RPGs as a youngster. Wondering if you have any favorites.
Well, I started off, my parents bought me and my brother the red box of Dungeons and Dragons because the guy at the toy store said we might be into it. Mm-hmm. And I looked in the book and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was inspired by it and I thought it was cool, but we couldn't actually play it. And it took us until like middle school where there was another kid who knew how to play, and we started playing it. And that is mainly the game I played. We tried playing Gamma World and we tried playing Vampire the Masquerade and we tried other ones, but learning a new system was such a sticking point for the group.
Yeah.
Because there'd be 2 or 3 people who were interested in learning a new system and would, read the book. There's really 2 of us. And everybody else was, I'm going to show up and I'm going to play because it's fun. But if you make me do any more work and figure out a new system, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so we would play Call of the Cthulhu-esque Dungeons and Dragons games. We would add in a madness effect to it. And we would, copy some of the rules from some of those other games, but still be rolling D20s or whatever that maybe you wouldn't do. We tried Star Wars with their D6s, and that was a lot of fun. But I think the only other game that I played regularly was the Fighting Fantasy game books, which were, 1-player choose your own adventures. And they had dice rolling in it, but I quickly realized the dice rolling was against another person is fun, but against a book is,
Right. Yeah.
It's no point.
Sure. Well, I want to switch gears a wee bit and talk about the tools that you use to create your art. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about which tools you're using these days.
I'm using Clip Studio, and that is primarily what I'm using to create my finished work. I try to do a sketch almost every day in my sketchbook, and I use regular graphite pencil, and then I use a brush pen to ink it, and Laurentian pencil crayons to color it, which those were like old school Canadian pencil crayons from when I was a little kid, and I haven't found another set that I like as much.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
So like I find some on eBay or whatever and buy old collections of slightly worn Laurentian pencil crayons.
Nice, good stuff. So what is the Clip Studio for? At what point does that enter into the process?
So when I'm writing a story, I'll just, word vomit things into a Word doc. But then I start placing that into Clip Studio to get an idea of like how it will fit on the page. Mm-hmm. Like, is this a good page turn? And, how much space will I have to draw this? And so I just start placing the word balloons first. There aren't even balloons at this point. It's just dropping in the text to see how it feels. And then the next thing I do is basically draw right on there. Okay. For this book, that's what I ended up doing. I did not write a script. I didn't say, like on page 3, there's a wizard who looks like this. I just drew it because I found that I'm a pretty fast artist. I've developed a style that is fairly cartoony so that I don't have to spend forever redrawing and drawing details, because I think that suits A, the age group I'm going for, and B, the amount of drawing and redrawing that needs to be done in a book. So I'm faster just drawing what the comic is basically going to look like and then getting the editor to say, yeah, no, this has got to change and that's got to change, and me going back and changing it, than me getting approval on something, then drawing it, and then going, oh, that's not what I thought that was going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we started, I commended you on the tremendous work that you do at the festivals and conventions, especially TCAF, and helping in the children's area. I know that there's a lot of eager young readers that want to get started into this reading environment for comic books. And I know that when you're there, you probably get inundated with questions about, hey, how do I start my own comic book? So I'm wondering if there's one piece of advice that you want to pass along for someone who wants to make their own comic book or graphic novel.
Well, the self-serving piece of advice would be to buy my book, 10 Secrets to Creating Your Own Comics.
Okay.
Draw out the story.
Sure.
But, which is basically a middle grade, it's aimed at middle grade kids. Because I love Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, but again, it was the same sort of thing with Dungeons & Dragons, a little too obtuse for kids to get into. But as far as advice goes, I think the important piece of advice is knowing how to take advice, to understand what advice is for you and what isn't, and what are you ready to take, and becoming your own critic in that regard, so that, like I could say something like, you have to finish the work you start. Don't move on to new projects. Make sure you finish what you start. But there are some kids that need to hear that, and there are some kids that need to hear, you're spending too long on this.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be going on to other projects. Leave this half finished and try something different. And knowing what you need to hear is in itself a skill. And to try and work on that, those chops of yours of being self-critical and looking at, when somebody gives you advice, how does it make you feel? Are you feeling guilty about it? Like, oh, that's right, I don't know how to draw hands, I should spend more time on that. Or is it making you feel angry? Like, no, you don't understand. I do it this way because of this. And then try and figure out, like, why isn't this coming across correctly to people? And just, be self-reflective.
Okay. Yeah, that's good advice, for sure. So we've talked about Complete the Quest, and I'm sure you've got a lot of other projects on the go, but I'm wondering, what can you talk about right now that you're not going to get in trouble for something that's coming down the pipe, so to speak?
Another thing I'm excited about is we're about to hit our 1-year anniversary for a Dungeons & Dragons stream I do called Magical Marker, where a bunch of us artists don't just play the game, but we draw it as it happens. And as far as I know, we're the only stream that does that. But it's like, when I used to play Dungeons & Dragons, when it's not my turn, I was always drawing what was happening in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just doing that live now. And I'm doing that with cartoonists Matthew Hottie, Caitlin Major, Boya Sun, and Priscilla Kim. And we've been doing it for a year, and we're doing like a PG-13 story of teens and tweens on their first big adventure away from their mentors. And so that's a fun thing that we do. And I'm looking at putting together a little video series. You're talking about giving advice to kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at, I've been putting together something called Deep Thought Balloon, which is going to be a series of videos about pop culture, comics, and things like that. And just sort of, I don't know if you're familiar with extra credits and what it does for video games, but trying to do that for comic books in some way.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
And then every month I do a comic in Owl magazine called the Spruce Street Squad. So if you have middle grade children's, between 8 and 12, Owl magazine is a great magazine to get them, because it's got all sorts of cool, fun things, including my funny comic.
Absolutely. That's tremendous that you've kept that up with Owl magazine. That's almost like an institution.
Yeah, they were the first people to publish me when I was like 8 years old as a drawing contest.
Yeah.
And so I'm really lucky to be back with them as an adult, writing a comic for them for, I guess, it's been over a decade.
Wow, that's tremendous. Good stuff there. For sure. So where do you recommend people go online and through social media to find out about your current and future projects?
I'm primarily social media-wise on Twitter. I'm at McLachlan Brian. I don't know who Brian McLachlan is, but my art teacher in college was like, oh, I hope you do well, because you're the third Brian McLachlan who came through this program. And the other two dropped out. But other than that, I have a website that's brianmcl.com, because I'm not going to make people try and figure out which way to spell McLachlan, because there's like about a dozen. And those are the two good places to catch me.
Good stuff. Oh, Brian, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
When I've listened to some of your other podcasts, you ask people what they've been reading lately. And can I give a thumbs up to something I just read?
Please do,
the last couple of weeks?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Montague Twins. It's a graphic novel that is sort of like a Hardy Boys story, but it's written for adults. And it's just the rhythm of the writing, the dialogue between the characters is fantastic. It's a modern update, like it's dealing with, it's set sort of in the civil rights era in America. So it's primarily a fantasy mystery, like there's, witchcraft involved, but it's also, they talk about, the Stonewall riots that are sort of happening in the background. There are things that are relevant to today that were happening back then. So it resonates quite well, I think. And art is gorgeous. And if you're interested in a solid mystery with great characters, I'd check it out.
Thanks to Brian for the chat. You can discover more about Brian on Twitter at MCLACHLAN Brian and online at brianmcl.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.